Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. I remember whistling as I walked through the door, a stupidly cheerful tune that died on my lips the moment I stepped inside. I'd left the office early, a rare treat, hoping to surprise Olivia with a quiet dinner, maybe a movie. Our anniversary was next week, and I'd been working insane hours to finalize the merger to secure our future. Our future. The irony would have been comical if it wasn't so soul-crushingly tragic. The house was silent, which wasn't unusual. Olivia often lost herself in her painting, blasting classical music that vibrated through the floorboards. I remember smiling, thinking about how I'd sneak up on her, wrap my arms around her waist and steal a kiss. God, I was a fool. I found them in our bedroom. The words feel inadequate, cliché, like something out of a bad soap opera, but that's what it was. Olivia, my wife, the woman I'd vowed to love and cherish, was in bed with Victor Carlyle, my best friend, my business partner, the man I'd considered a brother. The scene was a tableau of betrayal. The rumpled sheets, the discarded clothes, the two of them tangled together, their faces flushed with a passion that had nothing to do with me. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. I just remember staring, and the world seemed to tilt, to shrink, to become a distorted funhouse mirror reflection of the life I thought I knew. Nate. Olivia's voice was a gasp, a choked whisper. She scrambled for the sheets, pulling them up to cover her nakedness, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, something cold and calculating. Victor didn't even bother with the pretense of shame. He sat up, a smug, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Look who decided to come home early. I couldn't speak. My throat was constricted, my tongue felt like lead. The room was spinning, the air thick with a suffocating sense of unreality. Nate, it's not what it looks like. Olivia started, her voice trembling, but I cut her off. Save it. I managed to croak out the words, raw and ragged. Just tell me why. It was Victor who answered, his smirk widening. Why, Nate? Because we could. Because you were too busy playing the devoted husband, the brilliant businessman, to see what was right in front of your face. He stood up, completely naked, completely unashamed, and walked towards me. He was enjoying this, savoring my pain, my humiliation. We've been planning this for months, Nate, he continued, his voice a low, venomous hiss. The embezzlement, the framing, the company, it's all ours now. You're finished. Olivia, still huddled in the bed, finally found her voice. It was never about you, Nate, she said, her voice cold, devoid of any emotion. It was about the money, the power, the life we deserved. Their words hit me like physical blows, each syllable a fresh wave of agony. They'd planned this. They'd orchestrated my downfall. They'd used me, betrayed me, destroyed me, and they were enjoying it. Before I could react, before I could even process the full extent of their treachery, the doorbell rang. It was the police Victor had called. Of course, he'd timed it perfectly. Nathaniel Holloway, one of the officers, said in a stern voice, "You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." I tried to protest, to explain, to tell them it was all a lie, a setup, but they didn't listen. They cuffed me roughly and dragged me out of my own house, my own life, as Olivia and Victor watched, their faces a mixture of triumph and disdain. The last thing I saw as they shoved me into the back of the police car was Olivia's smile. A cold, cruel, utterly heartless smile. That smile would haunt me. It would fuel me. It would become the symbol of everything I had lost and everything I would reclaim. Prison was a different kind of hell. A concrete jungle filled with despair, violence, and the constant gnawing ache of lost freedom. The walls closed in on me, suffocating me, crushing me. I was surrounded by hardened criminals, by men who had nothing left to lose, and I was a broken man, a ghost of my former self, stripped of everything I'd ever held dear. The days blurred into a monotonous routine of meals, lockdowns, and the ever-present threat of violence. The nights were worse. The silence, punctuated by the cries and moans of other inmates, amplified my despair, my loneliness, my rage. I watched the news when I could, seeing Olivia and Victor parading their stolen success. They were on the covers of magazines, giving interviews, basking in the glow of their ill-gotten gains. They were living my life, enjoying my wealth, celebrating my downfall. Look at them, another inmate sneered, pointing at the television screen. Living the high life while you rot in here. His words were like salt in an open wound, but they were also a catalyst. They fueled the fire of my anger, my hatred, my burning desire for revenge. I tried to fight back legally. I contacted my lawyer, the one I trusted, the one who'd assured me he would do everything he could to help me. "I'm sorry, Nate," he said, his voice apologetic but firm. "There's nothing I can do. The evidence is overwhelming. Olivia and Victor have covered their tracks too well. They've made sure you have no way out." His words were a death sentence not just to my freedom but to my hope. I was trapped, condemned, abandoned. The day of my execution arrived with chilling inevitability. I'd exhausted all my appeals, run out of options, lost all hope. They strapped me to a gurney. The cold steel was a stark contrast to the burning rage that still flickered within me. I closed my eyes, picturing Olivia and Victor, their faces smug, their smiles cruel. "Any last words?" the warden asked, his voice devoid of emotion. I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down my temple. "Olivia, Victor," I whispered, my voice hoarse, filled with a venomous hatred I hadn't known I was capable of. "I curse you. I curse you both to hell." Then the darkness, a cold, final, all-consuming darkness. The darkness I thought would be eternal, ripped through me, a violent, desperate intake of air that burned my lungs. I was alive. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering, my body drenched in sweat. I was in my office, my old office at the company I'd founded, the company that had been stolen from me. Disorientation slammed into me. A wave of confusion and disbelief. The last thing I remembered was the execution, the darkness, the nothingness. I looked around, my eyes darting from one familiar object to another. The worn leather chair, the cluttered desk, the view of the city skyline from my window. It was all exactly as I remembered it, but it couldn't be. It shouldn't be. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaky, and walked to the window. I stared out at the city, at the bustling streets, the towering skyscrapers, the life that was going on, oblivious to my internal turmoil. I reached for my phone, my old outdated smartphone, and checked the date. 6 years in the past, before the betrayal, before the lies, before the prison, before the execution. My mind reeled. This was impossible. Time travel? It was science fiction, a fantasy, a delusion. But the memories, they were too vivid, too real, too painful. The betrayal, the prison, the execution. I'd lived it. I died. I walked to the small private bathroom attached to my office and stared at my reflection in the mirror. It was me, but younger, less hardened. The lines of stress and despair that had etched themselves onto my face over the past few years were gone. My eyes, they were different, clearer perhaps, but there was a new darkness lurking within them. A cold, calculating glint that hadn't been there before. The old Nate was gone. The trusting, naive, optimistic Nate had been murdered, betrayed by those he loved most. And in his place, something else had emerged. Something colder, harder, more dangerous, a vengeful ghost. I splashed water on my face, trying to calm the storm raging within me. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to survive. I'd been given a second chance, a miraculous, impossible second chance, and I wouldn't waste it. I wouldn't make the same mistakes. I wouldn't trust blindly. I wouldn't be a victim this time. I would be the predator. This time I would be the one in control. I looked at my reflection again, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. "Olivia," I whispered, my voice a low, venomous hiss. "Victor, you thought you could destroy me. You thought you could get away with it." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "You were wrong. I'm back, and this time you're the ones who will pay." I had 6 years to plan, to prepare, to orchestrate their downfall. 6 years to become the monster they thought they'd created. And I would use every single second. This time it would be different. This time they wouldn't see it coming. Stepping back into my old life was like entering a meticulously crafted stage play. I knew the script, the lines, the tragic ending. But this time I was the director and I was rewriting the narrative. I greeted Olivia with a warm embrace, a loving smile, and a kiss that tasted like ashes in my mouth. "I missed you, honey," I said, my voice the perfect imitation of the devoted husband I once was. "Missed you too," she replied, her voice smooth, her eyes sparkling with a false affection that made my stomach churn. Victor was there too, of course, playing the role of the concerned best friend, the loyal business partner. "Good to have you back, Nate," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. a gesture that felt like a viper strike. "We were worried about you." "Thanks, Victor," I replied, forcing a smile. "Good to be back." The dramatic irony was almost unbearable. They thought I was clueless, oblivious to their treachery, to the web of lies they were spinning around me. They saw the old Nate, the trusting fool, the easy mark. They had no idea that the man standing before them was a ghost, a revenant fueled by a burning desire for revenge. My internal monologue was a constant stream of vitriol, a stark contrast to the pleasant facade I maintained. Every "I love you," every "How was your day, darling?" every shared laugh was a carefully calculated performance, a mask designed to conceal the monster lurking beneath. "You think you're so clever, Olivia," I thought as she recounted some fabricated story about her day, her voice dripping with false concern. "You think you can play me for a fool, but you're the fool, Olivia. You have no idea what's coming." I observed them, constantly analyzing their every move, their every word, their every interaction. I was looking for weaknesses, for vulnerabilities, for the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. I was learning their rhythms, their patterns, their tells. I was becoming a student of their deception, preparing to use their own tactics against them. One evening, Olivia was particularly affectionate, cuddling up to me on the sofa, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm so lucky to have you, Nate," she purred, her fingers tracing circles on my chest. "You're the best husband a woman could ask for." My stomach twisted with disgust. I wanted to push her away, to scream at her, to expose her for the lying, treacherous snake she was. But I didn't. I forced myself to smile, to stroke her hair, to play the part of the loving husband. "Lucky," I thought, my internal voice dripping with sarcasm. "You have no idea how unlucky you're about to be. Olivia, you think you've won. You haven't seen anything yet." With Victor it was a different game. He was more direct, more aggressive, his arrogance a shield against any suspicion. "We're on the verge of something big, Nate," he said during one of our business meetings, his eyes gleaming with greed. "This merger, it's going to make us all incredibly wealthy." "That's great, Victor," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "But we need to be careful. We don't want to take any unnecessary risks." It was a subtle jab, a veiled threat disguised as cautious concern. Victor, of course, missed the subtext entirely. "Risks, Nate? We're not talking about risks, we're talking about rewards," he scoffed. "To think bigger, my friend, you need to have vision." "Oh, I have vision, Victor." I thought, my internal voice chillingly whispered, "I see your downfall. I see your ruin. And I see myself standing on the ashes of your ambition." I could see their plan unfolding with perfect, horrifying clarity. They didn't know that I was already 10 steps ahead. My campaign of manipulation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I started with Olivia, knowing that her insecurity and her paranoia were her greatest weaknesses. I knew from my past life that Victor had a wandering eye, a penchant for younger women. He'd always been discreet, careful, but I knew his patterns, his preferences. I used this knowledge to my advantage. I started leaving clues. A fabricated email from a supposed old friend of Victor's mentioning a wild night out with some young models. A misplaced receipt for a piece of jewelry. I knew Olivia wouldn't recognize a wrong number phone call late at night with a woman's giggling voice on the other end. These were small things, insignificant on their own, but cumulatively they were designed to create a sense of unease, a suspicion that Victor was being unfaithful, that he was hiding something. The masterstroke was the financial report. I knew Olivia was obsessed with money, with security, with the fear of losing it all. I created a fake financial statement showing a series of small unexplained withdrawals from one of Victor's personal accounts, transfers to an offshore account I'd subtly linked to him. I accidentally left the report on the kitchen counter, knowing that Olivia would find it, that her curiosity, her paranoia would get the better of her. The confrontation was inevitable. I walked in on them late one night, their voices raised in a heated argument. "What is this, Victor?" Olivia demanded, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. She held up the fabricated financial report, her hand shaking. "What are these withdrawals? Where is this money going?" Victor, caught off guard, stammered, "Olivia, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," she shrieked. "It looks like you're stealing from me, from us." "I would never do that, Olivia," he protested, his voice rising in desperation. "You have to believe me." But the seed of doubt had been planted. It had taken root in Olivia's mind, nourished by her own insecurities and my carefully crafted manipulations. I watched their argument from the doorway, a silent, unseen observer. The satisfaction I felt was cold, dark, and utterly intoxicating. They were tearing each other apart, just as I had planned. They were destroying their own relationship, their own partnership, their own future. "Get out," Victor, Olivia said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house and don't ever come back." Victor looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pleading. He expected me to intervene, to defend him, to play the role of the peacemaker. But I just stood there, silent, my expression unreadable. I offered him no help, no support, no sympathy. He'd betrayed me once, and now he was paying the price. It's exactly what he deserved. With Olivia beginning to unravel, it was time to focus my attention entirely on Victor. He was the architect of this, and his punishment needed to be total and absolute. It couldn't be public, not yet. It needed to start slow, and then when he least expected it, I would take everything from him. I began by subtly sabotaging his business dealings. A misplaced decimal point in a crucial contract, a leaked email revealing confidential information to a competitor, a forgotten phone call that cost him a lucrative deal. These were small acts, almost imperceptible, but they had a cumulative effect. Victor's reputation, his credibility, his carefully constructed empire began to crumble. I used my knowledge of his future actions to my advantage. I knew which deals he would pursue, which clients he would target, and which mistakes he would make. I was always one step ahead, anticipating his every move and undermining his every effort. I watched and studied his mannerisms. He was becoming increasingly unhinged, and I knew it was only a matter of time. He grew increasingly desperate and paranoid. He started making mistakes and impulsive decisions driven by fear and a growing sense of panic. He lashed out at his employees, alienated his colleagues, and destroyed his own reputation. He suspected something was wrong. Of course, he knew he was being targeted, but he couldn't figure out who or how. He blamed his rivals, his competitors, even his own staff. He never suspected me, the loyal friend, the grieving husband, the harmless, unassuming Nate. "I don't understand, Nate," he confided in me one evening, his voice raw with frustration. "Everything's falling apart. It's like someone's out to get me." "It's just bad luck, Victor," I replied, my voice soothing, my expression sympathetic. "These things happen. You'll bounce back." It would be a lie, I would make sure of it. He wouldn't get back up. I watched him drowning, and the best part? I was enjoying it. The final stage of my plan was the most intricate, the most dangerous, and the most satisfying. It was time to bring down the house of cards I'd so carefully constructed, to expose Olivia and Victor's crimes, and to ensure they paid the ultimate price. I focused on Olivia first. I knew her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, her deepest fears. She craved security, wealth, and status. She'd betrayed me for those things, and now I would use those same desires to destroy her. I started by creating a trail of false evidence, a meticulous fabrication that would implicate Olivia in the embezzlement scheme I'd supposedly committed in my previous life. I forged documents, created fake email accounts, and manipulated financial records, all designed to point the finger of blame directly at her. I made sure this evidence was easily discoverable, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead investigators right to her doorstep. I knew her habits, her routines, her passwords. I used this knowledge to. The evidence was planted in places where she would never suspect, but where the authorities would inevitably find it. Meanwhile, Olivia was becoming increasingly paranoid, isolated, and desperate. Victor, her partner in crime, was a sinking ship, and she was starting to realize that she was tied to him. My carefully orchestrated campaign of doubt and suspicion had taken its toll. She no longer trusted him, and he, in turn, was growing increasingly resentful of her. "I don't know what's going on, Nate," she confessed to me one evening, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Victor's acting strange. He's secretive, he's paranoid, I don't know. I just don't trust him anymore." "I'm sorry to hear that, Olivia," I replied, my voice filled with feigned concern. "Maybe you should distance yourself from him for your own good." My words were carefully chosen, designed to push her towards the edge, to make her believe that she was alone, that she had no one to turn to but me. The final blow came in the form of an anonymous tip to the authorities. I used a burner phone, a disguised voice, and a carefully worded message to alert them to Olivia's suspicious activities. I provided them with just enough information to pique their interest, to launch an investigation, to set in motion the events that would lead to her downfall. I have information about potential financial irregularities. I whispered into the phone, my voice disguised. Look into Olivia Holloway and the accounts linked to her maiden name. You'll find everything you need. I watched from a distance as Olivia's world crumbled around her. The police raided her home, seizing computers, documents, and financial records. The news headlines screamed accusations of fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal. Her carefully constructed facade of respectability shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. She turned on Victor, of course, in a desperate attempt to save herself. She accused him of masterminding the entire scheme, of manipulating her, of forcing her to participate. "He's the one, officer!" she shrieked during her arrest, her voice filled with a mixture of rage and terror. "Victor Carlisle. He's the one who stole the money. He's the one who framed Nate." Her words were ironic, a twisted echo of my own pleas of innocence years ago, but this time no one believed her. This time she was the one being dragged away, her reputation in tatters, her future destroyed. She dug herself deeper, and it was absolutely beautiful to watch. With Olivia neutralized, I turned my attention to Victor. He was a cornered animal, desperate, dangerous, and increasingly unpredictable. But he was also alone. His allies had abandoned him, his reputation was in ruins, and his carefully constructed empire was collapsing around him. I'd already set the stage for his downfall, of course. The leaked information, the sabotage deals, the growing suspicion within Vanguard Financial. It had all been leading to this. I knew Victor was trying to flee the country in his place. He'd been siphoning money offshore for years, preparing for just such an eventuality, but I wasn't about to let him escape. I used my knowledge of his plans, his contacts, his escape routes to anticipate his every move. I alerted the authorities, anonymously of course, providing them with the information they needed to track him down and intercept him. Victor, in his arrogance, tried reaching out to the old friends he thought he could still manipulate. He sent messages, but I made sure to cut his communication off. He called, but the lines were dead. The people he thought he had in his pocket suddenly wouldn't answer him. He was absolutely and utterly alone. He tried to salvage his situation, tried to call a lawyer only to find out his assets had been frozen. He tried calling his family, they didn't pick up. He couldn't escape, the walls were closing in, and I made sure to enjoy every second of it. He was arrested at the airport, trying to board a private jet bound for a non-extradition country. The look on his face as the police slapped the handcuffs on him was priceless. A mixture of shock, disbelief, and utter abject terror. The media had a field day. The story of Victor Carroll, the disgraced financier, the corporate titan brought down by his own greed and ambition, was splashed across every newspaper, every website, every television screen. He was ruined financially, professionally, personally. His name was mud, his reputation destroyed, his future bleak. He was facing decades in prison, the loss of everything he'd ever worked for, the utter and complete destruction of his life. And I had orchestrated it all. I was the puppet master, the unseen hand, the architect of his downfall. It was a masterpiece of revenge, a symphony of destruction, and it was perfect. He got everything he deserved. I visited Olivia in prison. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of closure. It was a final act of dominance, a final twist of the knife. The visiting room was stark, cold, impersonal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly greenish glow on the metal tables and plastic chairs. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. Olivia was brought in, her hands cuffed, her eyes downcast. She looked different. The arrogance, the confidence, the carefully crafted facade of sophistication, it was all gone. She was a broken woman, stripped bare, exposed. "Nate," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, fear, and recognition. "Hello, Olivia," I said, my voice calm, devoid of any emotion. She stared at me, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. "But you're dead." I saw you, I corrected her. You saw what I wanted you to see. You saw an illusion, a carefully crafted deception, just like you created for me. I sat down across from her, the metal table a cold hard barrier between us. I died, Olivia, I said, my voice low and steady. You and Victor killed me. You stole my life, my company, my future. You frauded me. Betrayed me, left me to rot. She flinched, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. There was none. But I came back. I continued, my voice taking on a harder edge. I came back to reclaim what was mine and to make you pay. I explained it all to her. The time jump, the 6 years of planning, the meticulous manipulation, the carefully orchestrated downfall of both her and Victor. I laid it all bare, exposing every detail of my revenge, every twist of the knife. I turned you against each other, I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. I made you doubt. I made you fear. I made you destroy each other. You thought you were so clever, so much in control, but you were just puppets, Olivia. Puppets dancing to my tune. She was sobbing now, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling. Why, Nate? She whispered. Why would you do this? I leaned forward, my face inches from hers, my eyes locking onto hers. You really don't remember, I said. It started 6 years ago when you stole my life, my company, when you took everything I had. She continued to shake her head, not understanding. You were never my wife, Olivia. Just a snake I forgot to step on the first time. Her eyes widened in horror, the full realization of what I was saying finally hitting her. She understood. She remembered. And she knew. She knew she was utterly, completely defeated. I stood up, turning my back on her, walking away. I didn't need to see her tears, her despair, her regret. I'd already won. Nate! She screamed, her voice a desperate, anguished cry. Please don't leave me here. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the visiting room, out of the prison, out of her life forever. My revenge was complete. Before I could truly move on, before I could embrace my new life, there were loose ends to tie up, ghosts to bury, traces to erase. First, there was the matter of my old identity. Nathaniel Holloway, the disgraced CEO, the convicted felon, the dead man. I needed to make sure that persona remained buried, that no one could ever link me to my past. I used my remaining time manipulation abilities carefully, sparingly, to alter records, to erase digital footprints, to create a narrative of a man who had simply vanished. A man who had succumbed to despair, who had taken his own life, leaving behind a legacy of shame and ruin. It was a delicate operation, a dance with paradox. I had to be careful not to create any inconsistencies, any ripples in time that could attract unwanted attention. The chrono guard, I suspected, were still watching, even if I couldn't see them. Then there were the physical reminders, the photos, the documents, the personal belongings that connected me to Olivia and Victor. I gathered them all: wedding photos, anniversary cards, business contracts, everything. I took them to a remote location, a deserted field far outside the city. I built a bonfire, a pyre of my past, and I watched as the flames consumed everything, reducing it to ashes and smoke. The faces of Olivia and Victor smiling, laughing, their eyes filled with a deceit I now saw so clearly, curled and blackened in the heat. Their images finally erased. It was a symbolic act, a cleansing ritual. But it didn't erase the memories, it didn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the rage. Those would always be a part of me, a shadow self lurking beneath the surface. I also had to ensure my own legal and financial security. I had amassed a considerable fortune during my 6-year second chance, using my knowledge of the future to make shrewd investments to accumulate wealth and power. But I needed to make sure this wealth was untraceable, protected beyond the reach of any potential investigation. I used the offshore accounts I'd established, the network of shell corporations, the complex web of financial instruments I'd created to shield my assets, to create a new identity, a new financial footprint. I became a ghost in the system, a phantom billionaire, untouchable by the law. Finally, I watched as the final pieces of my revenge fell into place. Olivia was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Her life in ruins, her reputation destroyed. Victor faced similar charges and was now also hunted as an accomplice. His fate, the company they'd stolen from me, the company I'd built with my own blood, sweat, and tears, was returned to its rightful owner, me. though I wouldn't be returning, not in the way I was. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a detached observer, a ghost in the machine. There was a sense of satisfaction, yes, but it was a cold, hollow satisfaction, tinged with a profound sense of emptiness. I'd won, I'd achieved my goal. I'd destroyed my enemies, but at what cost? I walked away from the city, from the company, from the life I'd known. I left it all behind, a clean break, a fresh start. I traveled aimlessly at first, drifting from one place to another, searching for something. A purpose, a meaning, a reason to keep going. I found myself drawn to quiet, remote places, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. I spent time in nature, hiking in the mountains, walking on deserted beaches, staring at the vast, endless ocean. I was trying to find peace, to escape the shadows of my past, to rebuild myself, to become someone new. I adopted a new identity, a new name, a new persona. I became invisible, a ghost among the living. But the past had a way of catching up. The memories, the nightmares, the constant fear of being discovered, of being dragged back into the darkness. I was successful, wealthy, powerful. I could have anything I wanted, but I wanted nothing. The things that had once motivated me, ambition, achievement, recognition, now seemed meaningless, empty. I achieved my revenge, but it hadn't brought me the closure I'd craved. It hadn't erased the pain, the betrayal, the loss. It had just changed me. I'd become a different person. Colder, harder, more ruthless. I'd embraced the darkness, used it as a weapon, and in doing so I'd lost a part of myself, the part that believed in trust, in loyalty, in love. I looked at my reflection in a shop window one day and I barely recognized the man staring back at me. He was a stranger, a ghost haunted by the choices he'd made. But there was also a strength there, a resilience, a determination that hadn't been there before. Ide surviva. Ide ubarkuma. I'd rewritten my fate, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was all I could ask for. The ending was ambiguous, uncertain. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever find peace, if I would ever escape the shadows of my past. But I knew this. I would never be a victim again. I would never be betrayed again. I would never be powerless again. I was the master of my own destiny, the architect of my own fate, and I would protect what was mine at any cost. As I walked away, disappearing into the crowd, a new threat emerged. A whisper in the shadows, a hint of danger on the horizon. Someone else knew my secret. Someone else was playing the game of time. My journey was far from over. The war for time itself had just begun. And I, Nathaniel Holloway, the man who should be dead, the man who stole time, was ready to fight. I had the advantage after all, and this time no one would ever be able to double-cross me.